Hello everyone, today we'll be discussing paper 2 of computer science IGCSE and this is the specimen paper. We have two specimen papers, so I'll be making two separate videos, and in this one we'll only be solving the 15-mark question, which is obviously the new sort of question that will be tested for the first time in the O level. And I'll be walking you through the whole question. We'll be having 15 marks for this, and I'll be assuming that you know what a 1D array is, what a 2D array is, and some basics of pseudocode. All right. So first we'll just look at the question and we'll visualize it and try to understand what is happening here. And it's very much advised that you spend at least 15 to 20 minutes planning the question, especially in the exam as well, or even more than 20 minutes, because paper two, the remaining paper two is pretty easy. It's pretty much the previous syllabus, so nothing new here. And that is why it's advised that you spend more time on this question, again because it carries the highest number of marks in the whole paper. All right, so let's start the question. We have a 1D array called student name, and then we have a 2D array called the student mark. And the 2D array contains the mark for each subject for the student, and the student name contains the names for each student. And then this is the most important part, that you'll be mapping the position of each student data in the two arrays using the same logic. So if the student is at index 10 in the student name array, it would also imply that the same student is in the position 10 in the student mark array. I'll show you a small diagram as well. All right, then we have the class size. This is basically a variable that contains the number of students in the class, and then we have the subject number that contains the number of subjects that have been studied. And then all the arrays and variables that have been used are already set up and have some data into them. All right, so you are not going to redeclare any of these, you are not going to initialize any of these, and you are not going to take input into any of these. Okay, otherwise you'll end up losing a mark. Then you have to find the average for each student, and based on that you have to give them a grade, and at the end of it you'll be finding the total, you'll be finding the average for each student, and then you'll be rounding them to the nearest whole number. Then for each student you'll be printing their name, their combined mark, as in for all the subjects, their average, and the grade they got, and at the end you'll just output some statistics of the class, like the number of distinctions, merit, passes, fails for the whole class. And most importantly, again, you do not need to initialize the array in the data. Sorry, the data in the array, because it's already given, and then you must be adding comments in order to earn full marks. And if you actually go and see the marking scheme of the question, you'll see that's the only way you'll get full marks. All right, so now we have the requirements ready. Now let's actually see visually how the program is going to work. So here we have So here we have these two arrays drawn here. So we have the student name array, and I've drawn it vertically. Okay, so you can draw the 1D array horizontally as well, but this gives a better idea. And here we have some indices, these numbers that are the indices, the position, this is the actual data. So the question says that this class size contains the number of total students. So we'll have n number of students starting from 1 going all the way till class size. All right. And then we have the 2D array, which says that it contains the marks for each subject of the student. So we have this many rows, that means this many students. And then for each student we have the subjects. I've labeled them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can assume that this is physics, chemistry, math, CS, biology, stuff like that. And this dotted notation is continued data, and then you have this ending. So 1 to subject number. Where is subject number coming from? Again, it's given in the question that it contains the number of subjects studied. So let's say if the student studied 11 subjects, we'll have 11 columns. And let's say if there are 30 students in the class, so we'll have 30 rows. And the most important part is the mapping. Again, the position of each student data in the arrays is the same. That means that let's say if we have Erin here, Erin is at 5th index in the student name arrays. Similarly, Erin would be all the marks of Erin in the student mark array would be at the 5th index of the 2D array as well, or more like the 5th row. Okay, so 5th row, and then you read each column, and this is all the these are all the marks of Erin's subjects. So you'll be summing them individually. All right. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to find out the total, and then we have to find the average. How do you find the total? We'll go to the first student, that is Messi. Like we'll start from the row 1 of the 2D array. We'll find the sum of all of these, and then we'll save them somewhere. Then we'll go to row number 2, we'll save the sum. Then row number 3, we'll save the sum. So we'll essentially need another array to save all of these, right? And the size of that array would be from 1 till class size. That means the total number of students. So let's say again, if you have 30 students, so you will have 30 sums, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way till 30. So I believe the question is pretty clear now. So we'll actually start writing the solution. The solution is in front of you, and I'll be explaining it line by line so it makes more sense. And it's actually very easy once you get the hang of it. First of all, declarations are most important, especially for the arrays that you'll be using. Again, you do not need to confuse this question statement where it says you do not need to initialize the data in the array. That was for the arrays that are given to you, and the ones, the student name and the student mark. These two arrays are not given to us because I told you we need to save total marks for each student, right? So let's say these are, let's say 300 marks, and this is 450, 550, 900, I don't know, some sort of marks. So you need to save the total marks for each student. So all of this needs to go into a separate array, and we'll call that array um, int marks, okay, individual marks. All right. So this goes separately. So what I'm doing is I am making an array, and I am declaring it with the size of 1 to class size. This means if there are 30 students in the class, so this total size of the array would be 1 to 30. And same for average mark. Because again, if you have the total for each student, again, you'll be finding their average as well, right? So for the average, I've used the name average mark. You can call it anything you want. I'm just shortening it to AVG mark here, okay? So this would be 300 divided by, let's say if it's 11 subjects, so 300 divided by 11, then 550 divided by 11, then 900 divided by 11, and then you'll find average for all the students. All right. Then we have some more variables. You have the current subject, you have the current student. These are the variables that we'll be using to address each of the students. And then you have these counters that you'll be using in the further part of the question. This one. All right. Okay. And you can also obviously declare multiple data types, multiple variables of the same data type in the same line by just separating them with the comma. Okay, so we have the constant declarations. This is optional. You don't need to do this. This is not mandatory. Uh, you can just assume these values to be constants. Okay, so this distinction is set at 70, and then you have the merit at 55, and then you have the pass at 40, and then any value less than 40 would be a fail. All right, moving on, we'll have, okay, so we have the initializations for grade counters. Again, we never assume that the some variable is going to start from zero. Okay, not in any programming language, not in any uh, pseudocode. So you always have to initialize it to whatever the question asks. So in our case, this would be zero. And these are the comments, by the way, with the hashtag. You can use the hashtag, you can use the double slash. I'm just using hashtag so the color is uh, coded for each line. All right, so this is again pretty simple. And then we have to initialize the totaling array. So again, like I told you, that you cannot assume that some count or totaling would automatically start from zero. Okay, programming languages do not know that. Similarly, let's say uh, you do not initialize your array to zero. Okay, the individual marks array, you do not initialize it to zero. So how would the program actually know where you're starting the first value from? So if we look at the code, let's say if I were to start this directly, if I ignore this code above, and if I directly jump into the loop, so this is how we sum. Just a reminder that totaling in pseudocode is done this way. What you write is you say total is equal to total plus some value. All right. And you can obviously change the name of the variables. Essentially, the variable on the left must be on the right and must be added into some sort of a value. So we're doing the same thing here. We have the total on the left, then we have the total on the right, and then we're adding it to the individual student marks. Now what will happen is you'll say, okay, let's start with the first student, and then we need to replace this value by something, right? Because I have not initialized my values to zero of individual marks, we don't have anything here. So you'll end up actually adding a null value or an undefined value into the marks of the first student, which would be 30. All right, so it makes no sense. So you always again have to initialize the values to 0 wherever you're either totaling or you're counting, again depending on the context. It could be any other value than a 0. All right, so how do we initialize the values to 0? Again, this is a very simple for loop. You run the for loop from 1 to class size. Why class size? Because this is how many students we have. So this is how many sums we have to calculate, and this is again how many zeros we have to initialize in the array. So I run a simple for loop from 1 to class size. Again, we do not need to know the number. Let's assume it's 30. So the loop runs 30 times, and then it goes to each index. So first of all, it will go to index individual marks index 1, and this will put a 0 here. Then from the next, it will go to the second index and it will put a 0 at the second index. And then at the third, fourth, fifth, and eventually the whole array. All right. So I'll just undo this. And yeah, that's it. All right. So the next thing we have to do here is we'll be looping through the whole 2D array. Now, why do we need to do that? Because again, we need to find the sum of the sum of each row in the student mark so that we can find one individual mark value, the total of all the subjects. How do we iterate through a 2D array? Again, this is um, a very important concept. If you're not comfortable with 2D arrays, then I would recommend you watch some video or you revise it properly, because otherwise you won't be able to solve the question properly. So first of all, what you need to do is, so the outer, this is what we call the outer loop, and this always runs for row number of times. Okay, in our case, again, it can also run for any other times for any other number. So we're denoting it with the row. So I'll say, since my class size is stored in this variable, so I'll run the loop 1 to class size times. Again, we're assuming 30. So this means you have 30 rows here. All right. Now for each row, this is what nested loop means, that for each row, this is what you have to do over and over again for each column. So you select the row, select each row, and then inside, using the outer for loop, sorry, the inner for loop, this was the outer for loop, this is the inner for loop, I would select columns one by one. Now what do we mean by this? So again, you select the first row, the current student selects, so we select the current student, this is current student 1, and then we're saying that for each student, you have to run the for loop from 1 to subject number. Now what does subject number mean? This means this horizontal, okay, the x-axis, or if in maths terms, or basically just you go through all of the columns one by one. So what are we saying? We're saying select the first student and then read their marks one by one. So you are essentially reading the first row. All right, and what you're doing is, using the first row, you're going to the first column, adding the second column, the third column, the fourth, fifth, sixth, all the way till the subject number. So this is what is happening here. Okay, so you're saying that for each student, you select one row. Okay, you selected the first row, and then you move on to the inner loop that is going to run from 1 to subject number, which is going to basically select the columns. So row 1, column 1, then row 1, column 2, then row 1, column 3, column 4, and this will run for the whole number of subject types. All right, I'll take this comment away. I hope it is understood now how to do this. Okay, so now what we're doing in the next statement is, in fact, I'll just put the comment away. So this is just a comment. This is not part of the code. This is just written here to show you what's going on. All right, now what we have to do here is that for each value of the 2D array, we just have to add this to the total in marks, right? First, we have to add the first row, first column value, that is 30, into the in marks, right? Then we have to add first row, second column, that is 50, into the in marks. That makes it 80. Then we have to add first row, third column value, that is 90, into in marks. So this would be, I guess, 150. My maths is not good. All right. So you'll keep on doing this. Then fourth, first row, then fifth column, then first row, sixth column. And how are we achieving this? We are achieving this using this notation. We are saying for the student mark, current student, comma, current subject. So now if you again do not know 2D array, in 2D array we have the array name, and then first we have the row number, and then we have the column number. Okay, so you need to remember this 2D array notation. This is how you read a 2D array. So what we're doing here is, this is the row number and this is the column number. So again, when the row number was 1 and column number was 1, so current student was 1 and current subject was 1. So what was at 1 1? We had 30, and we added 30 into individual marks index 1. So what was at index 1? Initially they are all zeros. Okay, so this is the index 1 of the individual marks. So what you get here is essentially you say 0 plus the first value, that is 30. All right, and then the new value of individual student current marks becomes 30, just like I showed you before. Then you do next current subject, and current subject changes to 2. All right, so now we have the same row value, we have the same current subject, and now this becomes 2. All right, so what is at the second index of the first row? You have 50, so you get 50 here. And what is the current value in the individual marks? You have 30. All right, so you get 30, and then you add this. All right, and the next thing you get is 50 plus 30 is 80. So we get the value as 80, and I'll change this to 80. So we are done with the first two. I'll just uh, bold them. Okay, and then now the value would change to, sorry about this, the value will go to next current subject. This would become 3, right? We were at 1, then it became 2, and now 3. So now again the current student is remaining the same, which is set to 1. Okay, because again the outer loop does not change until the whole of inner loop has run completely. So that is why we are still at 1 here. Okay, we're still at the current student here because the inner loop is still not completely done. So we have first row and third column. Now what is at the first row, third column? We have first row, third column, we have 90, so you'll add 90 here, right? So on and so forth. So I guess it's pretty clear. And again, this is quite a basic thing for a 2D read and pseudocode. All right, so I'll just undo these changes. Okay, it's done. All right, and so once this loop has completely run, the whole inner loop has run for the row, so I'll have some sort of uh, set of total marks, right, with all the subjects added into it. So in the first index of individual marks, I'll have Messi's total marks for all the subjects. Now, how do we find the average? For the average, we have to do literally the same logic. We have to make an average mark array that we made in the start with the same size. And now what we have to do, again, we'll use the same indexing technique, and whatever total marks we have at that index, let's say it's the first index, so we have 650, and we'll divide it by the total number of students in the class, which is given to us by the subject number. Sorry, with the subject count, not the total number of students, with the subject number. So you have, let's say, 11 subjects, so you divide the sum with 11. Okay, so this is what I'm doing here. I'm just dividing the total marks by this count of subject. Now in the question they said that the average mark must be rounded to the nearest whole number. Okay, so you have to make sure of this. So in order to do that, you have to use round, and then you put the value. So this is the round function. Okay, so this is some value here. I'll just replace it with the value so it's easier to read. Okay, and then round it to 0. This means the nearest whole number. So any value that is more than 0.5, you round it up, or lower than 0.5, it's rounded down. So this is the nearest whole number, and then we get the average. All right, so 650 divided by, let's say, 10 or 11, so we get 65. This is the average mark for Messi across all the subjects. Now, what will happen next, or what should happen next is, as the question says, you have to output for each student the name, the mark, the grade, and the average. Okay, so we're still in the first row. Okay, this is um, all of this code is part of the inner loop. Okay, so inner loop only ran once. It will only go to value 2 when we'll see this next current student. Okay, then we'll go back up. Okay, so the printing part is very easy. You just have to like print the name. You get the student name from the student array. Again, what is current student? Current student is the index or the loop variable that we're using for getting each student, and it is also in our case this pointer to the row 1 and row 2, row 3. And again, what is this signifying? It means that the first row is student Messi, second row is Ronaldo, okay, so on and so forth. So you get the name. So if the current student, the actual value is 1 right now, so this would return us Messi, right? And then the combined total mark, again, since we have 1 right now in current student, so what is at the first index of the current student for individual marks? You get 650. So this would print combined total mark 650. And then average mark you'll get from the average mark array, which would return you 65. All right. So every time the current student would change from 2 to 3 all the way till 30. So this would keep on and changing the values row by row. Okay, we are done with this part as well. In fact, we should add a comment here. We should say uh, outputting the data, the student data. All right. Then they're saying that you also have to print the grade rewarded. Okay, we've not done anything about the grades yet, so we'll be getting to it now. Now, how do we give the grade? So it's pretty simple. A couple of if conditions. If the average mark is greater or equal to 70, then you give a distinction. So what do I write? I check if the current average mark of my student is greater than or equal to distinction. Now, what is a distinction? Distinction is just a constant, okay? That is set to 70. I told you that these are optional, so you can just replace it by 70. Not an issue, okay? You can replace this by 55 and you can replace this by a 40. The only important thing here is that you have these individual counters, okay? You cannot skip them. So if this is greater than or equal to 70, again, what is current student? It is currently 1, then it would be 2, the 3, the current row. So the first value in average mark is 65. Again, this whole row, Messi's information. So this is it greater than or equal to 70? No. Is it greater than or equal to 55? Yes. So merit number would be +1 and you'll print grade merit. Alright, as they've asked you, that you'll be printing the individual grades as well. And you also have to count for each student um, what they're getting. Okay, this is the next part. So we are counting it side by side. Then the same thing for the pass student and the same student thing for the fail student. So these are the conditions: greater than or equal to 70, greater than or equal to 55, greater than or equal to 40, or less than 40. So if none of these conditions are true, that simply leaves us with an else condition. That means the student failed, and we increment the value by 1 as well. So all of these are the counters for the grade awarded to each student overall. All right, and then at the end we go to the next iteration of our um, outer loop. So current student value from 1 now becomes 2. And then again the current subject, the inner loop would repeat the same times from 1 till subject number. Alright. And then here instead of 1 we'll have 2. So current student would become 2 and current subject becomes 1. So now what do we mean by this? We mean that you'll go to the individual marks second index, this one, all right, and then you'll add the student mark at the second row and first column. So second row, first column, we have Ronaldo here. So you'll add 77 into 0, and then you get 77 as the total mark here. And then you'll do the same thing here. You'll get the second row, first column, you got this, then second row, second column, and its value 30. So you'll add this to 77. So on and so forth, will repeat the same thing. So I won't go through it again. All right, and this will keep on happening until the loop actually finishes to the class size. So I'll change this to 1 as well. All right, and at the end they're saying that you must, I'll ignore this, you have to print, it calculates, stores and outputs a number of distinctions merits for all students in the class. And then what you do, because you are counting each of the grades that the students are getting. So all the students, how many of them got distinction, merit, pass or fail. So you had these counters, right? They're incrementing depending on each student's average, and then you simply print them at the end. This is literally the whole question for 15 marks. Okay, so it's not that difficult. You just need to be very well aware of the 2D arrays, the 1D array, and most importantly, how to map this. So I'll attach the Excel file and also share the collab file in the drive link in the description, and then you can find it from there. All right. Thank you and good luck for your exams. Bye bye.